The reason why at a young age, she was saying at 4 years old, I was cleaning the whole house. And I told her, Mom, because that was the only time I was able to hear your voice, when you would command me and tell me, go do this for me, go do that for me. Other than that, she wouldn't speak to me. So yeah, that neglect that I grew up in really messed up my identity. If I was loved, if I was even, existed, I was treated like I wasn't existing at all. So imagine living in that environment where you just feel like you're not existing unless if someone needs something from you. And I think also because of that, like when someone needs something from you, was used by the enemy to mask love, right? So people would manipulate me by showing me that they love me, but they actually wanted something else. So as a kid, I was manipulated into being sexually molested. So people would mask their love, and I thought, oh, I've never seen love before. This must be it. And then, Marhaba, my name is Linda. I am from Iraq. I was born and raised there. I am actually a Catholic Chaldean from Iraq, which is a very ancient tribe that's also mentioned in the Bible. So I grew up and I was born and raised in that culture. And yeah, a little bit about what that looked like. We speak a whole different language from everybody in Iraq. It's just very ancient. It sounds like Hebrew, like we say Shlam Alochen, which means peace upon you. So that's the culture I grew up in. It's very warm, and we're very family oriented. So I grew up around that a lot as a kid. And as fun and warming and as beautiful as that sounds, but it had a lot of things that I struggled with when I was in that family type of culture. So growing up in that family culture, I as a female one, I was always really looked down upon, because also Iraq as a culture, women are not really considered to be in any types of hierarchy, whether if it's government or business. So we were all always like treated differently. And then within my family dynamic as well, even though from the outside we might look very warming and welcoming, sometimes in our home, it was just it had a brokenness into it. So yeah, my family originally is Catholic. So I was born and raised in that church. I always went to church. My uncle is a priest and my grandma was a chef there. So I was always around that atmosphere and, having mass and hearing about God and just the Bible, even though it was kind of different from the actual Bible. But, I would hear those lectures. And, growing up there, I still did not have that personal connection with God. I always thought God was that judging person that's telling you, don't do this, don't steal, don't kill, don't commit all these sins. And I think because of that, I always felt far away from God. I always felt like God didn't love me, or God didn't care about my day to day. And that also was portrayed in my family dynamic. My family was never relational. It was always we would have like arguments at home a lot. There was a lot of fighting. And so, yeah, as a child growing up there, rejection started because of that. Sometimes I would feel the reason why my parents are fighting and they're not happy in life in general was because of me as a daughter, because I was really neglected. I wasn't really paid attention to. Actually, I was just talking to my mother about this yesterday. I was like, the reason why at a young age, she was saying at 4 years old, I was cleaning the whole house. And I told her, Mom, because that was the only time I was able to hear your voice, when you would command me and tell me, go do this for me, go do that for me. Other than that, she wouldn't speak to me, because she was also dealing with a lot of trauma. So yeah, that neglect that I grew up in really messed up my identity. If I was loved, if I was even, existed, I was treated like I wasn't existing at all. So imagine living in that environment where you just feel like you're not existing unless if someone needs something from you. And I think also because of that, like when someone needs something from you, was used by the enemy to mask love, right? So people would manipulate me by showing me that they love me, but they actually wanted something else. So as a kid, I was manipulated into being sexually molested. So people would mask their love, and I thought, oh, I've never seen love before. This must be it. And then without knowing, I was getting abused. So at a very young age, that was what I grew up experiencing. And then in 2008-ish, from between 2006 and 8, I'm born in 1995, so I'm 27 currently. I also went through the trauma of being in a war zone between Iraq and America. So the neglect there, and then being in a war zone, like needing my mom's safety and my dad's covering, I just felt like a burden to them when they were trying to flee for their life. I'm a child, and I'm crying out for my mom at a age of 8, right? And all I'm hearing is them yelling at me, like, stop, like, and I felt like I was a burden, because here they are fleeing for their life, and I'm crying, So that also got into my identity of always feeling like I'm a burden to people. And so with all of that being said, I grew up around that dynamic of always like really not having that closeness to my family members, even though we would spend every single day together, sometimes like in family gatherings, or going to church every day even. It never meant that we were intimate. And that's so important, to realize that just because you are around someone doesn't mean you know them. And I felt like my parents and my whole family are strangers to me, even though we were together every single day. I don't think they knew me. I don't think they knew my favorite color. I don't think they knew like what I loved. And so it was the same thing with my relationship with God. I never knew who he was. I never knew his thoughts for me. My parents never really sat down with me and told me about what God felt about me. We always just prayed the rosemary and fasted, like just the Catholic things that we do religiously, but I never knew that God really cared about me, and that was reflected also in my family as well. So yeah, that kind of just, to speak a little bit about my relationship with God, it kept me away from him, because I was like, well, if they're preaching Jesus to me, I don't think I want that Jesus, because one, they're demonstrating him really poorly. And if that's the Jesus that they're talking about is that way, I don't want him. And so I just didn't really think that, even though I would go to like youth ministry and stuff like that, I was going there for the wrong reasons. Like, someone had a crush on me, and of course, like, someone showing me love again, that cycle was like, oh, someone is paying attention to me. So I kind of like gave myself in that way. Not, like, it was one guy that I was with in Iraq, but we secretly dated, and so that was like my life after, moving from the war. It was me like getting the attention from guys. So it was that, like, going to church was always that. I was always like, just like, oh, my boyfriend's gonna be there, like, I'm gonna go see him. And it was never about God. Maybe we would talk about God, but it never really pierced through at all. I guess you could say, like, I just didn't feel the presence of God there. And so if there's the presence of God, there's liberty. So that's why I'm kind of like, I don't know about, that's another topic to talk about. But that I never felt the presence of God, and I never felt the liberty. Matter of fact, I was more chained than ever going into the Catholic Church every day. So yeah, after the war, I was, I was born and raised in Baghdad. So after the war, we moved to Kurdistan, which is most of like the Kurdish and like that's where my family's from. So the Chaldeans and all are there. But my family was there because of their work and stuff. So we moved back to Kurdistan, and I went to high school there for 4 years. And my dad got an opportunity to work with like a military base. And they were engineers. They were doing pipelines of water and stuff like that. So he worked as a driver security type of thing. And at the end of it, they gave him the opportunity for my whole family to go get visas and flee to America as refugees, and as just the situations and stuff like that were happening. And so, you know, being there, I'm like finishing high school. I was on my senior year, you know, just graduated 11th grade, going to 12th grade. We got that opportunity, and we had just bought a house, like kind of like my parents were just now settling in to be our own family and separating ourselves from like living with our grandpa, because in Iraq, like their kids live with them. So it's like, you know, we're finally settling in ish. And then my little sister, out of nowhere, we don't even have a history of cancer, appeared 3 years old. She got leukemia. She was diagnosed with leukemia, and that kind of, you know, prompted my dad to reconsider and be like, yeah, I think it would be best for her to get treated here. So I think we should do that, you know, with my mom's motivation and everybody else. So fast forward, we moved here in 2012, a decade ago, in November. July 2nd, so 2 days before like 4th of July. So it was kind of like a cool way to enter America with like the most celebratory countrywide vacation. So that was like my introduction to it. And I never would have ever thought I would be here, but the Lord had a plan. I was so interested in the American English language when I was in Iraq in high school. Like I used to listen to Chris Brown. I used to listen to like all these R&B, hip hop, and you know, even though like as a teenager you're like, oh, he's so cute, but God was using that to develop my language. And I was watching Hannah Montana and like all these like Disney Channel stuff, and my language started developing, and I was fluent. Like in high school I was getting all A's. Everybody was failing English, and I was getting all A's because I would watch, you know, stuff like that. And when I came here, that's when my language started getting used and stuff like that. And my relationship with God was the last thing I wanted to think about. So starting high school again, I went into that like, you know, if a guy paid attention to me, then that must have been like his way of saying that I actually love you. And in Iraq, if someone actually is interested in you, that they're ready for marriage. So my ex, when I was there, that was our intention until I had to move. You know, my parents knew about it and everything. So it's kind of heartbreaking, but I thought it was kind of the same thing. I never really thought like the American culture was different, but I was really like just taking advantage of the same battle I faced as a kid, of that like being masked with love, but it actually was something different. And so I was in that cycle until, you know, I graduated high school. And after I graduated high school, I started thinking about my future, like going to college. What do I want to do? And thought maybe the best way to do it is go to the military, because they would pay for your college. And my parents, you know, didn't have anything for me laid aside. They were actually struggling to meet ends. And so I started working in restaurants and, you know, wanting to save money, but then also got caught into like just spending, like helping them with bills, and then spending some of that, like because I'm working really hard, I kind of want to like maybe eat something or like do something fun. So it's like either bills or, you know, I didn't really do anything much with that money. And so the military didn't really work out. I think God didn't want me to go there. Those doors kept closing and closing, and I just became so hopeless. And I felt like I was just going to be stuck. Like, I'm going to be stuck in like this family environment where my parents are always constantly fighting and we're arguing. And until this guy was like, no, I'm ready to marry you. Like, I see myself marrying you. And in my head, I knew like this was like, I felt it. I was like, I don't think this is the right thing, but I kind of forced myself because I saw that as like my way out, my like ticket. And so I got involved with this guy, and I didn't know really like a lot about his struggles, but I moved across the country with him to Oregon. So yeah, at the age of 21, I graduated high school, and so also I graduated high school when I was 19 because I had to repeat 3 years, and that's why I graduated at the age of 19. Yeah, I like moved across the country with him, and we were good. I loved him, he loved me back. But then as soon as we get there, his life just started crashing to a whole different like alley from what we had already spoken about. Like, you know, I had already picked up a wedding dress, and all these plans that I was doing, all the promises he was making, like we're gonna buy a house, we're gonna have this beautiful family, you know, all these promises. And one of them was also like going back to church. So I was like, oh yeah, maybe my mom would love that too, like this would be great. But as soon as we get there, man, like it was just like something, just he got into like a whole different, and it was really bad for him. Like, he didn't really get any better, and so I was trying to kind of help save him from his struggles, and of me like even putting myself in his shoes. I'm like, all right, like I understand maybe this is hard for you to get through, so maybe I will continue. Like, for 2 years I stayed with him thinking that I could save him, and my parents didn't know anything about that. You know, that he was struggling with drug addiction, and you know, I was just like, oh my goodness, like I don't know what to do. Like, my families are expecting me to get married. That's a part of our culture. They already know I'm with this guy. Like, we can't not get married. Like, I've actually moved with him, so that means we need to. And I felt trapped. I felt like I couldn't go back because they would like judge me and say, you know, like, we told you so, blah blah blah, and then I couldn't leave him because I loved him. So in that trapped moment, I think God used it. I came back here to visit my parents, and this random Uber guy, who was the pastor's brother, was giving me a ride, had invited me to his church. And so at that time I was like, no, you know what, I'm gonna go, because I don't think this is gonna be the same as the Catholic Church. I had already went to a church in Oregon that was non-Catholic for the very first time, and I actually was understanding the message this time. I was like, oh, like this is interesting. I've never experienced that. So when he invited me to church, I was like, oh, okay, like as long as it's not Catholic, I think I might like it. So when he invited me to church that day, my ex-fiancé also came with me, and I got engaged before I moved to Oregon. So my ex-fiancé came with me, and during the service, when the pastor was preaching about the birth pains, and there was like hurricanes and floods were happening, and then fires on the West Coast were happening. So he was saying like, these are the beginning of the birth pains of Christ coming back. I was very intrigued, and I was like, this is interesting. All of a sudden, we're like ending the church service, and I'm standing up, like just, you know, listening to the worship music that they had. I heard a voice, literally like just very loud and clear. I was like, what is this? Like, you know, I'm looking next to my ex-fiance, he was crying. I was like, what the heck is happening? Like, what is this? And I just hear this voice saying, I am very real. The Bible is very real. And I automatically knew it was Jesus. I like, out of no shadow of a doubt. It was like that knowing inside of you. You know, it's like he was telling me with his presence, this is who I am. And that moment right there, I was like, I can't deny him. Like, he legit just showed up. And so I went back to Oregon, and one of the pastors had given me a word from that church. Now I know what words is, but basically he came up to me, and God gave him a word for me. And he said, God is going to speak to you in a garden. So when I went back, I knew that God said that, hearing Jesus's voice, the Bible is real, I'm real. I'm like, I must read the Bible then. Like, I have to know what this book is. And so as I was starting to read the Bible, he said to me, Linda, if you want to know me, you have to know my commandments. You have to know who I am. And he spoke to me in the garden of our front yard. And when that came to pass, I started seeking him. And I told him, God, I feel stuck. Like, you need to talk to me. And so I opened the Bible, and the first verse was, kind of like him telling me what to do. He was like, take your mother's advice as a pearl necklace around your neck, and your father's word as a crown in your head. That was in Proverbs 1. And I took that literally. I'm like, oh, that's God speaking to me, telling me what to do. So I told my parents eventually. I was like, I didn't tell them that my ex-fiance was struggling with addiction, but I just told him, I was like, he's struggling mentally, like he's going through a lot, and I don't know if I can support him anymore. It's been 2 years. I've been with him. He's been to rehab a couple times. Like, it's affecting me. Like, I got so skinny. I was like 112 pounds, skin to bone. I was so depressed. And I also got addicted to weed when I was there, because that was my only escape from going back home, seeing him high. Like, I even was just trying to, for those 2 years where I was trying to cope myself and trying to avoid the reality by working too much. I had 3 jobs and I was going to school full time, anything to avoid the reality that I was in. And so, drinking and smoking, and, that's what I did to kind of escape those moments. It was giving me those momentarily pleasure, I would say, or momentarily happiness of I can finally just have an escape. But every morning I would wake up, it's the same life, it's the same person I'm with, and same struggles. Nothing has gotten better. So yeah, eventually I told God, I was like, well, God, one thing I know, I started feeling convicted about my smoking and stuff. So I told him, Lord, I really don't want to do this anymore. I started crying while I was smoking the blunt. I was like, I just don't want to do this. And so I felt like he wanted me to get baptized. So 3 days after I got baptized, I felt the physical presence of God. It was just so overwhelming. I turned around, I was laying next to my ex-fiance, and I turned around to tell him I'm feeling something so powerful. I couldn't talk. My God, muted me, because I was trying to tell him about this experience, and God was like, this is for you, and it's not for him. And the minute I started just allowing God's presence over me, I heard his audible voice saying my name 3 times, Linda. And every time he said it, it carried a message into my spirit. So that's when I was like, I'm fully submerged. That was in 2019. And so I told him, okay, God, if you want me to continue this relationship, I can. If you don't want me to, whatever you want, I just want you. I know that I just want you, because I've just now experienced that he is, I started experiencing that he's truth. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to stir away, not knowing that you're real. That means everything in the Bible that you've said about yourself is real too. So I don't want to choose anything else other than you. And the minute I prayed that prayer, 2 weeks after that, I broke up with my fiance. I moved out of, I was trying to move back home to here from Oregon to DC. And, in that type of transition, I felt in my spirit, God was saying, you're going to get to know me, and you're going to get to tell people about me. And it was so interesting. I felt like they were just 2 weighing in each other and balancing each other out. So I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to come back here to the church. I heard his voice. I'll learn more about him and start telling people about him. But in the transition of every time I was trying to come back, my savings would go to something super, like, oh, fixing the car I was trying to sell. Of course, I'm not going to sell it broke. It was just so weird. Until I met someone from the church that I was going to, and she introduced me to a school called Youth with a Mission. And their logo was to know God and to make him known. So God was telling me about that. And so when the minute I decided to take their discipleship training school, all the money that I needed, $7,000, within 2 months, I was able to save. So that was God's confirmation for me to go to that school. And so, yeah, from the minute I went to that school, that's when I just experienced God's healing. He started healing me about my identity of me being abandoned and how he separated me from my family like Abraham to bring me here so he can show me who he really truly is, the true God, not the God that they were preaching about, thought that they knew, but he showed himself real to me. And from that moment when I was going to that school in 2019, I was like, all right, like, I'm giving my whole self to you. Like, I can't. You're just healing me right now, and you're doing all these things to me. And so, yeah, that's what got me to where I was at. I finished the school. It was like a 6 months program. I went to Thailand for mission trips. I went back. I surfed at that school. In 2021, I came back here to DC. I started attending this church called Kingdom Now International. It's amazing. I definitely recommend it if you want to see the power of God. But once I came here, I started really loving the presence of God, and he was still working on my identity. So yeah, it was all by his grace. It was all by his grace. So yeah.